Winter Roses, Autumn by Fairytalelovr, Chapter 19. Supper was a joyful meal that evening in the Tower of the Hand, though Ned was in a mood. Sir Barristan had to leave, but the Tyrells stayed, and while they debated skill over a roasted boar, Rob, John, Garland and Loris were planning a small melee for the next day.
"What kind of tricks do you think he'll use?" Ned asked Adam, as they were in the family room afterwards. "Hidden daggers that would get to Rob through the seams of his armour. A blade on the point of his boot can get Rob by surprise and slice right into his leg." "Boiled leather around the calves would help, wouldn't it?" "Yes," Adam said. "I'll work with the tanner tomorrow. For this, at least, the awful sellsword the imp brought with us has been useful. Jory's making sure we have strong armour, and I will personally inspect the mail." "I wish I could say we were worrying too much." Ned sighed. "I wish I was going up against Jaime Lannister. As much of an oathbreaker as he is, he wouldn't have stooped down to tricks."
Adam exhaled heavily, looking out of the window, and lowered his voice.
"I don't know what you walked in on that night. And honestly, I don't think my imagination could ever live up to the chaos. And I know Jaime vowed to defend his king. But you cannot begin to imagine what Aerys would have been capable of. He murdered my father and brother in a gruesome way. I think I can. Aerys was too unpredictable. You can't. Only someone who saw his madness would be capable of understanding the choice Jaime was faced with. What he did to your father and brother was just further proof that he had completely lost his mind. But you weren't there, Stark. You cannot begin to understand what was the real relationship between the Mad King and Tywin. Besides, the rebellion had been going long enough, so I wouldn't put it past him to have a nefarious plan in place to make sure that, if the rebels ever got to King's Landing, they might get in, but they wouldn't live to celebrate their victory. What could he do? Order his soldiers to kill every rebel? If he had enough men for that, he wouldn't have rebels in the capital in the first place." "Aerys was not one to lose," Adam said, turning back to his good brother. "If he was to go down, he would take the rest of the world with him. Back then, all Jaime wanted to be was a golden boy, the perfect Kingsguard. I shudder to think what mad plan Aerys ordered done for Jaime to lose it and kill the king."
Ned was unsure of what to say for a moment, and Cregan finally interrupted the awkward silence that stretched. "Papa! Up, Papa, up!"
"Isn't it time for bed, my boy?"
Ned asked with a chuckle. Cregan threw his little arms around Ned's neck, or as far as he could reach, and laid his little head on his father's shoulder. "Sweetie Papa."
"Come on, Papa will put you to bed tonight."
Adam watched them go, drawn back to the past. Once, he had been a man who would be like Ned, unable to accept any justification for the breaking of an oath. But he had seen what the Mad King had become. He had seen what Rhaegar and the small council had tried so hard to hide from the rest of Westeros during those final years. He had learned that some oaths had to be broken. Blind loyalty was just as bad as treachery. Willis poured the fortified wine into 2 goblets and brought them to the armchairs before the fireplace.
"You're plotting away again, grandmother,"
he said, offering her one of the goblets. "Well, plotting is what keeps people alive in this realm, is it not?" she jested, taking a sip. "This is very good and very strong. Where is it from?"
"New project from Lady Starling. She gifted us a bottle." Willis smiled. "It seems one of the farms in the Blessed Island expanded the original area of wild grapes into a large production, and they had a surplus, so she decided to have them mix some recipes, and this happened. She said she wanted something completely different from Dornish or Arbor wine. Lord Tyrion was the first tester, and he seems to have approved of it, and we all know his reputation. I have to admit, it is a good one."
"Yes, but for after supper, like now," Elena said, twirling the wine in her goblet. too sweet and strong to go with the meal. Very wise of her to find something new, too. It is easy to surpass the shitty grape water the Dornish like to sell as wine, but Arbor Gold, nothing will ever compare. That is not a competition she can win. We should watch out for that one. She laughed. Lady Starling is full of ideas, and very resourceful.
I thought you were counting on that from the beginning, Grandmother, Willis said,
sitting back and relaxing on the armchair, enjoying the wine and the fire. I was, and I am. They're making quite the fortune, with their mines and trade deals, and this new wine promises to be a good investment. Elena chuckled. In a few years, they'll be able to afford the crown's debts. And wouldn't it be ridiculously funny if Daenerys Targaryen bought the throne from under Robert, with the money she took from lads he gave her? Oh, the irony!
Well, it would certainly be better than wasting money and resources in another war. But you have been plotting something for days now, Grandmother, even before that spectacle in court. No one else is here. Can you tell me?
Elena frowned. Where are they? Garland and Leonette are still at the Tower of the Hand. Father and Mother have already retired, and Loris is out. Out, she snorted. Your brother will end up finding himself in trouble with that one.
He's the king's brother, Grandmother. He won't get into trouble. At least not one that speaks against their house. But stop changing the subject.
You'll regret that decision, she said, and chuckled. I am plotting your marriage.
He twisted his face into a grimace. Well, I know I can't avoid it forever. And since everyone who is anyone is in the city right now, it is the best time to make proposals. Am I allowed to have an opinion?
Oh, my dear, you always have allowed to have an opinion. However, I will only listen to it if it is the same as mine.
Oh, I know that, Grandmother, he chuckled. Who have you been considering?
The North is on the rise, Willis. Has been for a while. And if this latest development is anything to go by, Lord Stark is the most powerful man in the kingdoms, and Robert will do anything for him.
Marjorie's already a Stark, Grandmother. Lady Sansa is obviously otherwise engaged. You cannot be thinking about the other daughter. She's too young.
There is nothing wrong with a double alliance, even if I know the Starks are as honourable to a fault. I had thought about Sansa when we had first arrived in the city, but after the way her betrothal was announced, Ned Stark wouldn't break the alliance, unless Lord Dane had done something to offend his daughter. So, no, we can no longer count on Sansa Stark. The other girl is indeed too young, and from what I have heard, too wild. She would be ill-suited to you.
That is not likely to stop you if you really wanted the alliance,
Willis said with a knowing look. Well, no, it isn't. But I have been thinking. Isn't it about time that we settle our differences with the Manderleys?
Willis raised an eyebrow. You mean the house that the gardeners, whom we served at the time, kicked out of the Reach, and they found solace and home in the North? Those Manderleys?
The very same. They found a home and lands in the North, and grew to be one of their most important bannermen. So important that when the position of the Master of Ships was vacant, Ned Stark called Lord Manderley to fill it. They follow the Seven, so it's one less thing to worry about. And I've done my inquiring. His granddaughter is turning 16 later this year, so we could have the marriage set next year, with enough time to plan it. She took over the lady's duties in Winterfell when Catelyn was sent away, so she has experience handling a household, and, as she was in charge of the child, she has shown to be a good mother. She is one of Lady Stark's ladies now, so I am certain she is well versed in entertaining. All in all, a suitable match.
You've talked to her, Willis said accusingly.
Well, of course I have, Olenna said, rolling her eyes. Do you think I would consider her if I hadn't tested her beforehand? She will be a kind and loving wife, exactly what you need. And she's got a keen mind as well. That I could sense.
All right. Will you talk to Father?
Well, if I must, Olenna rolled her eyes. Wouldn't it be much easier if I could run the family?
You do run the family, grandmother, he said with a fond smile.
Well, thank the gods you managed to inherit my brains and not your father's. He is too much like his own father, and Luther was... Well, given the way he died, I am not surprised most is difficult. Get ready to invite the god for a stroll in the gardens. We're leaving this wretched, smelly city with the issue settled.
Willis only nodded. He knew his grandmother and trusted her judgment. She would never think of an ill-suited match. He only hoped he and this Manderley girl could get along. Loris sneaked into the bedchamber, his good mood suffering a bit with the extra caution he had to employ tonight. After the afternoon's entertainment, the courtiers were buzzing around the castle, gossiping and laughing at Joffrey's downfall. Not even the Lannister sympathisers were acting offended, since even Sir Jaime had come in defence of Lady Sansa, and the king had followed the letter of the law. Renly was standing by the fire when he entered, and he seemed half worried, half exhilarated. If someone could feel both at once. "What is it?" Loras asked. "Well, that little brat is gone," the Stormland said. "I wish I could feel guilty for disliking my nephew, but I don't. I think only Cersei likes Joffrey, but he is gone now. Well, after the trial, and no one will ever have to suffer under his whims. Won't Tywin Lannister argue?" "He might," Renly conceded, "but I don't think he will. Even Jaime came in defence of the Stark girl. There's no saving Joffrey, not without looking weak. And Tywin won't do that. As long as Tommen is the heir, he'll stay put." "So why are you worried?" Loras asked, kneading his lover's shoulders. "Gods, you're tense. What's wrong?" Renly exhaled, leaning back to enjoy the massage. "Ned won't be happy with Robert. Not after my brother all but sentenced Robb Stark to fight for Sansa's honour." "Joffrey has no training," Loras pointed out. "Robb has nothing to worry about. Trust me, I was just there, watching him train. Sparring with him. He is very good." "As good as you?" "Well, no, obviously," Loras said, annoyed. "But he's good. He won't find any trouble finishing the blonde twat off." "I know, but I wouldn't put it past the Lannisters to use trickery. If they harm Robb, honestly, this mess alone might be enough to send things to shit. But if anything happens to Robb, Ned will pack up and leave. And I'm actually surprised he hasn't left yet. And then the kingdoms will descend into chaos." "But you can keep them in hand, can't you? I mean, when Lord Stark was away, you handled everything perfectly. So, if he goes, perhaps the king will finally see your valor and give you the handship." "I don't know if I want that, to be honest. Besides, all these new plans and projects, Robert and Jon Arryn led us descend into a pit of debt and usury. I could keep the kingdoms in hand, and twice. But Ned is the one with the real new ideas. Not to mention, he's the only one with the guts to go against the king. To do what needs to be done and fuck Robert's opinion. Fine, I'll help and all. But especially with the new Night's Watch deal, I'm worried we'll drown in even more debt. Robert won't listen to anyone else. He won't care about anything else but his wine, his whores and his hunts, and his tawnies. And if the Iron Bank comes to collect, we simply don't have the how to pay them. We can't even raise taxes high enough for that. No one would hear of it. There'd only be unpaid taxes." "It will work out in the end, Renly. Lord Stark hasn't left, which means he is invested in the kingdoms as well. Besides, Robb will be fine. Trust me, there is a whole bunch of people worried about him. Worrying about trickery from the Lannisters." Loras began kissing his shoulder, the column of his neck, and Renly groaned when he reached his earlobe. "You need to relax." Loras whispered. "You are very good at that," Renly said with a moan. Then he turned around and seized the other's lips with his. On the next morning, Stannis paid a call to Ned. I would like to apologise, Lord Stark, the Lord of Dragonstone said as the two men sat down in Ned's solar. Whatever for, Lord Stannis? It is no secret I have retired from court ever since Jon Arryn died. And I returned, very abruptly, to help our realm to be rid of Joffrey. I do regret that I have such feeling towards my own nephew, but I saw the boy he is. He is not fit to be our next king. However, in my effort to do what I judge to be right, I have put your son and heir in harm's way. That was never my intention, and I do regret the outcome. Thank you, Lord Stannis, Ned said sincerely. I do believe your intentions. And I do regret that this is how we feel about the boy. But I won't hold Robert's decision against you.
Stannis nodded.
There are 2 more reasons for me to be here. Actually, they were the reasons I came intending to speak to you, my lord, before my brother did what he did. I don't suppose you will be shocked to learn that I believe that Lord Arryn was assassinated, rather than dying of natural causes. I already have this in confirmation, Ned said. He was poisoned with tears of Lys. And I also know he was working with you in searching for Robert's bastards.
Stannis rose an eyebrow.
It seems I was not very smart in my mistrust of you, then, my lord. Do you know who gave him the poison? No, Ned shook his head. Only conjectures.
Well, I would bet our conjectures match, Stannis said.
But without proof, it takes us nowhere. My second point is something I would like your help in convincing my brother of. I'm sure it won't surprise you that Robert and I aren't on the best of terms right now, my lord,
Ned said, forcing himself not to clench his jaw in anger.
No, it is not in the least surprising. But I suppose it might all be in our best interest. Cersei is long gone to Casterly Rock, though to appease them Robert might allow her return. And regardless of the result of the trial by combat, even if no one expects Joffrey to win it, the boy has already been disinherited. This means Tommen is already the next king. Given the way Joffrey turned out, I would advocate that it would be better for everyone in the 7 kingdoms if he was raised away from Cersei and Robert.
Ned sat back, pursing his lips in contemplation. It was not a thought that had occurred to him before, but it certainly had merit. He would be the first one to speak against separating father and son, but he had to admit, perhaps if Joffrey had been raised with a few limits, with a father that cared and a mother that taught him right from wrong, instead of telling him he was owed everything he wanted, perhaps then the boy might have been saved, even if sometimes there was no cure for a dark soul.
Am I to assume you are volunteering for the post, Lord Stannis?
Ned asked. Taking the role himself would serve no purpose, as he lived in the Red Keep. Robb was barely married. He wouldn't wish to saddle his son with raising a royal child while still learning how to raise and care for a family, as he knew the toll of the task. And he wouldn't even contemplate sending Tommen to Benjen in the Midnight Fortress. The response from Casterly Rock and having Tommen as a Targaryen hostage would be nightmarish.
I am not the most effusive of men, Lord Stark, but I doubt Robert even knows what the boy looks like. And Cersei strikes me as a woman who would be too consumed with herself and the firstborn to be worried about the second son. I would ensure the boy was raised properly, educated in all the necessary arts to be a competent ruler. He would understand perfectly that even a king has to answer to the law and the rules of society. My lady wife has also suggested that, if the boy feels close to his sister, we might take in the girl as well. I believe she is of an age with my own daughter. They can play together and be children or whatever.
There was, however, something that bothered Ned. Through his investigations and Lord Varys' reports, he had put together that Jon Arryn had discovered the true identity of Cersei's children and had begun to look for one of Robert's sons, or even hoping to band them all together and prove that every single child the king had had outside of his marriage bed had his colouring, and therefore the Queen's children had to be bastards. But Jon Arryn had drawn Stannis into his search. Had he only asked for Lord Stannis' help in providing for his blood nephews and nieces, without explaining how deep his suspicions ran? Or was Stannis aware that Robert had no legal children to call heirs, and therefore the Lord of Dragonstone was the heir to the throne? Did he intend to keep Tommen and Myrcella as hostages so that once Robert died, he could claim the crown himself? But no, Ned chastised himself. He had been living in King's Landing for too long. Stannis was a correct man, dutiful and honourable. He would have called for the immediate annulment of the children's title, and possibly of Robert's marriage to Cersei. He wouldn't have cowered in Dragonstone for 3 years, especially after the Queen had been sent to Casterly Rock.
You have my support, Lord Stannis, Ned said.
Robert had just proved he had no idea what it was like to have a child. It was better that, if Tommen and Myrcella were to have no real love from their parents, at least they would have a proper education. Robert Baratheon, it was well known, was the personification of his house's words. He had been upset as Ned had left his chambers the other day, and his words had cut like a knife, which is why he hadn't reacted at the time. But 2 days had passed, and the Lord Hand had not returned, not even when the king summoned him. On the next morning, the steward had said Lord Stark declared himself busy with other issues and unable to oblige. Robert had vented and yelled, but, in the end, acquiesced. Today, however, the steward returned saying he wasn't even granted access to the Tower of the Hand, and that the guards had only said Lord Stark was unavailable to pay any calls. After yelling and breaking whatever breakable things were within reach, Robert decided enough was enough. If the Lord Hand didn't come to the king would come to the Lord Hand. What was unacceptable was that they were not on speaking terms. So, ignoring Sir Barristan's shy suggestion to at least wait for the trial to be done, and Lord Rob to come out of it unscathed, Robert left his chambers with one clear mission: to make peace with his friend. He was drawn to the courtyard once he arrived at the tower, though, hearing laughter and children playing. He recognised Ned's daughters. The boy was likely his youngest son by Catelyn, who was there sitting in a far corner, and the 3 baby boys were likely Ned's youngest, Benjen's, and the third was easily recognisable with his damned silver blonde hair. The fallen princess was sitting with them, telling them a story with hand puppets that had the children entranced. And then galloping hooves drew everyone's attention as Jon came into the courtyard, his little girl in front of him on the saddle.
"Mama, Mama, we've seen a monkey!"
Lyanna exclaimed excitedly. "Did you, my love?" Daenerys said, standing up and helping her unfasten from the saddle.
"Was it scary?" "No, Mama, I was with Papa. Nothing is scary."
Chuckling, Dany took her from the saddle and set her down. Freed, Lyanna immediately ran to her aunts, telling them about the monkey she had seen. "How was it at the stables?" Dany asked as Jon gave Winterstorm off to a stable boy. "All set," he beamed proudly. "They'll have them ready to go when we leave. And she doesn't suspect a thing." Dany chuckled. "I don't think any other gift will ever top that one." "You gave her a dragon egg, love," Jon said quietly, mindful of their whereabouts. "A live dragon waiting to quack. Trust me, there is no competing with a horse." "We'll talk again when she gets her own direwolf, shall we?" Dany said as they went to join the others. Robert only watched as Jon took his son and threw him into the air, the pale hair of the boy sparkling in the sun as he laughed mirthfully. The little girl was excitedly telling a story, but then suddenly stopped and squealed with joy, crossing to the other end of the courtyard yelling, "Grandpa!" Ned's laughter boomed around as he picked her up. "A monkey, eh?" he said, highly amused. "Did you give it some food?" Lyanna gasped, disheartened.
"Papa, we forgot! The monkey is hungry!"
The adults laughed as Jon solemnly promised that they could bring some food to the monkey on their next ride. Rickon stood from where he was sitting with Catelyn, picking up 2 wooden swords.
"Father, I want to practice too. Rob is the only one practicing now."
The laughter died down a bit at the reminder hovering over their heads. "Come on then," Ned said. "Wish Grandpa luck, Leo."
"Always!" face. Sorry, Uncle Rickon, but Grandpa wins,
she said, running back to Danny as she was set down. Ned smiled, picking up the wooden sword, and gave a small round shield his son was animatedly giving him, and waited for Rickon to get into position.
Keep your head up, he warned as they parried.
Rickon made the effort, but his arm kept lowering, and Ned brought his sword to the boy's neck.
You need to keep your shield up.
It's too heavy,
the boy complained.
If it wasn't heavy, it wouldn't stop a sword, son.
He chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair.
Let's go again, but keep your shield up, or I'll ring your head like a bell.
Rickon laughed and got into position again. Robert only watched, even as Ella came with a servant bringing food and refreshments. It was a perfect family day. It was something completely foreign to him, to be honest. Siblings played together. Parents caring for their children. His own parents had died too long ago. Too long for him to remember. And Stannis had never been one to play. There was a faint memory of his mother, a kind lady. But Lord Stefan was always strict and their interactions were limited to the training yard. Though, not like this, a loving teacher, but a strict tutor interested in a skilled son. This is what he would have had. He would have taught his sons with care, and Lyanna would have doted on them, as well as taught their daughters to stitch, embroider, and other womanly arts, and Ned would have been their favourite uncle. This was what Rhaegar Targaryen had destroyed. Just as the thought occurred, as his fury began to well and rise inside him, a gust of wind knocked over one of the posts nearby, and, untethered, the banner fluttered around, hitting the king straight in the face. Robert slapped away the offending silk, scowling at the winter rose that stared back at him like a bad joke. He stomped back to his chambers, cursing lusty dragons forevermore. The morning came with a clear blue sky and shining sun, though the mood in the Tower of the Hand was tense and quiet. Breakfast was a mostly silent meal, though Lyanna was looking from one to the other, not understanding what was happening. No one was about to explain to a 2-year-old what a trial by combat was. Their way from the tower to the right courtyard facing the sea where the trial would happen was filled with anxiety.
I need you to come back,
Marjorie whispered once they were inside the tent, clutching Rob's collar in her fist.
We haven't even been married for a fortnight yet, and you gave me a beautiful name day gift we didn't get to enjoy yet.
We will,
Rob said, placing a hand on her anguished face.
I will come back. We will enjoy several rides, and I will have several children to make us laugh. I promise.
You had better,
she said. Ned and Adam cut into their moment, coming inside.
I'm sorry, Marjorie, but we need to get the armor on,
Ned said. She curved the corners of her lips in a half smile and left, crossing the flap John was holding up for her.
Prince Oberyn is here, John said. He would like to pass on his good wishes.
Rob nodded, and John allowed the man in. Adam rolled his eyes and only extended his hand. Oberyn smiled.
I don't know what you mean, old friend,
the prince said.
You're not putting poison on his sword, Obi. We're having a fair fight.
You perhaps, Sir Boring and Update, but the boy will be fighting a Lannister. I won't bother mentioning my opinion of them.
What they did that night was unspeakable, Prince Oberyn,
Ned said.
And I still stand by the opinion that Gregor Clegane and Amory Lodge should have lost their heads for it. But we cannot stoop down to their level. Their dishonour is not ours.
The Dornish prince turned and stared at Ned with his black eyes closed into thin slits.
Very well. No poisoned blade. I get it. Not that I was expecting my little gift to be accepted, but I do wish you good fortune, Lord Rob.
Thank you, Your Grace.
You have been trained by one of the finest knights on this land, my lord,
Oberyn continued as Catelyn came inside.
And I've seen the boy training with his golden Kingslayer uncle. Not even our Adam here could whip that pathetic thing into anything resembling a warrior.
Isn't Lady Ilaria waiting for you in the audience, Your Grace? Adam asked pointedly.
Of course.
Good luck. Load her up.
The prince nodded to all present.
It's time, son,
Catelyn said in a shaky voice.
Father,
Robb said, anxiety bubbling in his stomach.
Please don't. I would just prefer if you were in the audience. Are you sure?
Ned asked, and Robb nodded.
All right. But, son, I need to remind you one thing. It is all right to be scared. I have the skill and the courage, Father,
Robb insisted. Ned smiled sadly.
The only time a man can be brave is when he is afraid, son. If nothing scares you, bravery means nothing to you. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that something is more important than fear.
Robb nodded, and Ned patted his shoulder, leaving the tent with Catelyn.
Do you want us to go too? John asked. No, it's...
Robb swallowed dry.
If you don't mind staying with me.
John only smiled and got the scabbard from the table as they left the tent. Jaime's leg was twitching as he watched the squire put the golden armour on Joffrey. The boy was trying to maintain his air of superiority, but the knight could clearly see the trepidation and paleness, and actually how green he was.
You heard what the king said, Jaime reminded his son for what seemed to be the 100th time. A trial by combat doesn't need to be to the death.
So I just have to put him on his back? That will be too easy.
Joffrey smiled falsely. Jaime held in an exasperated sigh. He hadn't had much hope to turn Joffrey into the finest knight, or even any kind of knight, in only 3 days, especially after the first sparring match they had had, and with the memory of how Arya Stark had disarmed Joffrey so easily at the Crossroads Inn, throwing his old sword into the river. He had hoped to at least make it sure the boy wouldn't be immediately taken down, that there would be some resistance, but the only resistance he found was Joffrey's in holding his sword any proper way. Fucking Stannis! He cursed mentally for the 1000th time. If the king's brother had remained in the Dragon Fortress, Jaime would be the one fighting Ned Stark, and all would be well. But no! He had to come out of his self-imposed exile and screw up the simple plan they had in place. Even if Robert, in his pathetic wish to save his friend, made the stupid decision to lead Lady Sansa to name Robb, even easier for him. But now he had to stand by and watch his son face a challenge he could not win. The squire bowed and left the room, and Joffrey let out a trembling breath. Now that the armour was weighing on him, it seemed that finally he had realised the dire situation.
What happens after the trial?
Jaime exhaled.
Robert already exiled you from the capital, so we have a retinue set aside. We'll get you out of the city walls and on your way to Castle Rock before the sun sets. But I'll no longer be prince! Your grandfather will certainly challenge the decree, but by then you will be safe with your mother in the rock. And if Robb Stark wins? When Robb Stark wins, Jaime thought. As Robert said, the trial is not to the death. And do not defy it, Joffrey, he warned, knowing his uncle and others would have given him tips on tricks. So, regardless of who wins, you're leaving for Castle Rock this afternoon. Uncle Stafford would ask for an audience with the small council to challenge the decree, and your grandfather is only expecting word if he will need to come to the capital.
So grandfather will get me my title back, Joffrey insisted. I will still be the next king?
Joff, revoking your title is an affront to our house. Your grandfather would never let it stand.
Joffrey nodded, and they remained in silence until the squire returned and said it was time. The area where the trial would take place was already crowded, the row of audience filled with lords and ladies. 2 sides of the courtyard had shaded places where the competitors could await the trial. Joffrey chose one of the 2 sides and immediately sat down on one of the chairs, pulling at his collar.
This is too hot,
he complained. It needs to be to protect you,
Jamie said, hiding an eye roll as he set the sword on the table. Be glad autumn brought some relief from the heat. Joffrey only huffed as the crowd swelled in murmurs. Ned Stark had just arrived, trailed by his former wife, and climbed the steps to join his current one and the rest of the family. Sansa was wearing a purple dress today, a clear statement if there ever was one, as she sat next to her betrothed. Not long after, Adam led the way, Jon and Robb coming behind. Robb took one look at his opponent and snorted. If he bleeds, will his blood be gold too? He mocked. And indeed, he had cause. With his golden hair, the only speck of any other colour on Joffrey were his green eyes. Tywin would have been bleeding dry, annoying cousins without value for years now. Adam muttered under his breath. Thankfully, Robert arrived then and took his seat at the dais. He looked around and was hurt for a moment at seeing Ned was not only sitting far away, but did not even turn his head to acknowledge the king's arrival.
Renly, get this over with,
he said. The other nodded and climbed down to the space where the fighting would take place, and horns sounded, quieting the crowd. In the sight of gods and men, Renly said loudly, we gather here today to ascertain the guilt or innocence of this boy, Joffrey of House Lannister. The crowd rose in murmurs again, and Jamie bit back a curse. That was another clear statement. The duel is to be only to the first blood. To continue any further will be held as an offence to our king himself. The horn sounded again, and Renly climbed back to his seat. Good luck, brother, Jon said as he reached for the sword on the dais. Remember the space around you, Adam reminded, offering the helmet. I will, Robb promised, but shook his head. That's too heavy. This is not a battle. It will only get in my way. I'll be faster and see better without it. Doubtful the golden brat will be able to get through my guard enough for the helmet to be essential. Adam nodded and put the helmet back on the table, as Robb went to the middle of the courtyard before the king. Across from them, Joffrey had already put his golden helmet on when he noticed Robb had refused his, and tried to take it off. Don't be proud, Jamie cautioned, but Joffrey didn't heed it and threw the helmet away, also going to the middle. Both champions bowed to the king, and then turned around. Jon offered Robb his sword, and went back to his place. I don't like the sight of that rack, he commented quietly to Adam, nodding towards a rack filled with different weapons at the fringes of where the duel was to happen. The courtyard should be clear. I know. I'm pretty sure it was put there on purpose. A trick to try and corner Robb, but I doubt Joffrey would have the skill or presence of mind to see it through. Robb and Joffrey bowed to each other, as tradition demanded, and the horn sounded again. Robb waited, like a wolf lurking for the prey to make a mistake. Joffrey's hand shook slightly as he held the golden sword with two hands, and the northerner wanted to laugh. First mistake. The disinherited prince, though, had no patience, and soon brought his sword down in attack. He was so slow that Robb, bulkier and strong, unlike Jon and Arya's quick and graceful moves, was able to simply step to the side and avoid it. Joffrey stumbled a bit after his movement didn't meet resistance, only air, drawing laughter from the crowd, which only inflamed him more. He kept hacking his sword around, which Robb easily parried, making Jamie lower his head in second-hand shame. After a moment, though, Robb tired of the game, and attacked himself. Joffrey needed both hands to put on a defence. While he focused all his strength on the sword coming for his neck, Robb kicked his foot out and snaked it towards the blonde's calf, tripping him onto his back. Joffrey fell to his back with a loud clang, momentarily disoriented. The northerner kicked the shining golden sword away and brought his to Joffrey's neck. You're a pathetic waste of breath, Robb said, holding his sword to the boy's jugular. The crowd went quiet to hear. You are a coward who lets others do the fighting for you. But when it comes to owning your actions, you can't. You commanded your dog to torture my lady's sister so you could watch and laugh. But you wouldn't have the balls to do it yourself.
You are a disgrace to your name, and you will live the rest of your days in disgrace, knowing that you are nothing, that you have become nothing."
Joffrey was trembling now, and Robb started to step back. "The duel is not over yet!" Joffrey yelled, humiliated. "It is to first blood!" Robb snorted. Joffrey was still on his back, supported by his elbows, and he still had his sword to his neck. He lifted it a bit and made a small cut on the blonde's cheek.
"There is your blood, princeling," Robb mocked. "It might disappoint you to discover it's as red as the rest of ours. I'm sure you believed it was made of gold. Or maybe that's just your shit."
He stepped back and began to return to where Jon and Adam were smiling, the crowd laughing at his back. Then he saw Jon's face fall, Adam widening his eyes. But before he could do anything other than frown, he heard clambering footsteps, his mother, stepmother, and wife screaming his name, and a whoosh of steel went by his ears, and the world tumbled around him. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. Bit of a long one, that one, but a good one. Oh boy, that lovely family day. That was so nice. I like how they're all coming together. I did skip a little bit of Renly and Loras, but you guys know I'm not one for sex scenes, so while I'm happy for them, calm down. Though I do have an opinion. I don't know how old Loras is, but he can't be much older than Marjorie, and she's just turned 16. But Renly was born like a fair bit of a while before the rebellion, so I'm a bit concerned of the age gap there. But, it's Game of Thrones, I'm sure there have been worse. Which isn't comforting, but you know, we're so desensitized to it now. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.